All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wellness in the Movement video series. So this series has 6 components, and right now you're on video 3, which is about radical self-care. So we'll be talking to you today about that topic and digging deep into that. But before we do, we wanted to introduce ourselves. We went through some introductions in our first video when Dr. Serrata, Molly Thibodeau, who's one of my colleagues at TCFE, and I introduced ourselves, but we wanted to give you a brief introduction again in this video in case you haven't seen that one yet. So I'm Jen Mudge. I'm a public policy coordinator with the Texas Council on Family Violence. And in my role, I work to support survivors' mental health and well-being, as well as mental health and well-being of advocates and staff who work at family violence programs in our state. So I'm happy that we're here doing this series, and hopefully it's a useful resource and tool for you. Molly Thibodeau isn't with us today, but she's also a resource. She's a public policy manager at Texas Council on Family Violence. And the two of us are always available to answer questions or have a meeting or just have a conversation. All right, and I will pass it over to Dr. Josie Serrata.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Serrata. I am a licensed psychologist here in Texas. I'm a clinical and community psychologist. I have a group practice where we specialize in trauma-informed and culturally relevant care. But I also do consultation with organizations, provide support around being trauma-informed and culturally responsive, and a lot around organizational wellness and taking care of advocates, and our frontline folks are doing amazing work and taking care of them so that they in turn take good care of the survivors and the families that they work with. So I'm excited to have partnered on this project and be with you all again today. Thanks, Jen. I think we can, yeah. So when we developed this series, we wanted to have a mix of sharing definitions, but also having some points of pause and reflection. So our hope is that you're taking this, you're watching this video maybe with a cup of tea or coffee and some water, and just having a moment to breathe and take in the information that we're sharing. And so with that, we would like you to take a few moments to either open a notepad or a Word document on your laptop, or pull out a journal. And we're just going to walk you through a couple of journal prompts of self-reflection. Self-reflection is a very powerful tool to use. I know oftentimes we're so busy in the work, it's hard to pause. But when we do, it can be very important, very beneficial to sit and just write down your thoughts, what's coming up for you. And so in this moment, this is our reflection question. What do you think of when you hear the word self-care? And this is just for you. So you just write down any words or phrases or sentences that come front of mind for yourself. And we'll pause here and just give you a few moments to take note. Okay, so I can imagine some phrases came up like time off, right? Taking a bath, maybe just taking a deep breath. Sometimes we might want to go get a massage or take a vacation, right? Big things like that. And so just pause and take a look at your list. And what we're going to do next is we want to shift our focus with the conversation today to start to think of how self-care is very radical, especially in the work that we do. And so if you want to open up the video, we have a beautiful video that we love to reference when we're having this discussion of Angela Davis sharing her perspective on what she considers radical self-care and why self-care is actually very radical. So I'm going to pause there and let hear the words of wisdom of Angela Davis, and then we'll come back.
Anyone who's interested in making change in the world also has to learn how to take care of herself, himself, their selves. For a long time, activists did not necessarily think that it mattered to take care of themselves in terms of what they eat, in terms of mental self-care, corporal self-care, spiritual self-care. I know that there were some people who emphasized it. I'm thinking about one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, Erica Huggins, who began to practice yoga and meditation in the 70s. And she encouraged many people, including Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, to join that practice. I think they did a little bit of it, but I think our movement would have been very different had we understood the importance of that kind of self-care. Personally, I started practicing yoga and meditation when I was in jail, but it was more of an individual practice. Later, I had to recognize the importance of emphasizing the collective character of that work on the self. Well, it means that we're able to bring our entire selves into the movement. It means that we incorporate into our work as activists ways of acknowledging and hopefully also moving beyond trauma. It means a holistic approach, I think. I think longevity is important, and not simply individual longevity. It is equally important to recognize that as we develop our movement today, we're creating a terrain for the emergence of new activists. And what we do today has an impact on what younger people will be able to do tomorrow. I think we have to imagine ourselves as connected to people who came before us and to those who will come after us. Black people all over the world have been subjected to the most unimaginable forms of violence, slavery, torture. But at the same time, and this is what Black people have offered the world, we've also produced beauty, music, and art. And I think that the self-care that gets produced by Black people recognizes the connection between struggle and art and beauty and the imagination. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous not to recognize that as we struggle, we're attempting to presage the world to come. And the world to come should be one in which we acknowledge the collectivity and connections and relations and joy. And if we don't start practicing collective self-care now, there's no way to imagine, much less reach a time of freedom.
We go to the next slide. We'll take a moment to now would like you to jot down some reflections. You may have heard radical self-care before. It comes from the movement of Black liberation, and really has this lens of a very systems perspective of self-care, as she discussed. So if you've heard it before, that's okay. Were there any new reflections or new things that stood out to you this time? I know I've watched this video many times, and there's always a new nugget that comes out each time I watch it. If it's a brand new term for yourself, take a moment just to jot down, what do you think of when you hear now the word radical self-care? What stood out to you? And we'll give you a few moments. All right. Jim, would you like to share any notes or comments of what might have come up for you as you think of the terms self-care versus radical self-care?
Yeah, thanks, Josie. Yeah, I think when I think of self-care, I think it's become a term that we hear a lot. And I think it can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I think sometimes it makes me think of like things I need to buy, like, like buying products or buying, spending money to do something, which can certainly be part of our self-care. But I think what comes up for me, like when I listen to Angela Davis talk about radical self-care, is that it's like, it's bigger than that. It's more holistic, and it involves collective care too. It's thinking about our communities and the people around us. In addition to doing things that help us, like the meditation and the yoga that she talked about, and how powerful that was for her and for others that she knew that were activists. But that it's kind of takes on this bigger there's a bigger perspective to it. And we think about the systems that we're in, as you were mentioning earlier, the system where radical self-care kind of acknowledges the systems that we live in and how that can sometimes make it harder to practice self-care. So I think self-care in itself is kind of a charged word. Sometimes I prefer to use wellness, although that can become a charged word too, and has different meanings to people. But I think it's the point that I like that Angela Davis is making is we're taking care of ourselves and we're taking care of each other within systems that sometimes like don't take great care of us. So those were some of my thoughts on.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that she does put it into historical context, right? Especially for individuals who identify as BIPOC or marginalized or underserved communities. Historically, our bodies have been used, right, for the purposes of producing and capitalism and all those things. And oftentimes we internalize the need to work, right, and to produce as part of our own identities. But being able to take a step back and put it into a larger historical context can help us to connect with why it is radical, especially for BIPOC individuals, in terms of how our bodies have historically been used and how we can, in a way, take back some power and ownership of practicing it in this way of buffering that systemic trauma and generational trauma that's been handed to us in terms of how we are expected to work and produce, and pausing and stopping that trauma and that flow, right? And so that piece always stands out for me, and I like to highlight that aspect because some folks may grapple with the word radical But if you put it into context the way she did and historical context, then it makes sense. So we'll keep talking through a little bit more and tease this out more. I think the next slide we talk about what radical self-care is not, right? And so, like you said, Jen, it's not ignoring, right, systems, right? It's not ignoring systems like racism and capitalism that have contributed to the stress and the poor mental health and burnout, right, of our workforce. It's not pretending like that isn't there. And I think that sometimes folks have a struggle with it because they'll say, you asked me to practice self-care and I'm doing what I can, but yet I'm still in a system that's overworking me, that is, right, asking me to do more than my hours and not paying me, right, accordingly, and things like that. And we do want to acknowledge that. We definitely are not saying that this is not that. And we really conceptualize this within systems language, and you'll have different videos where we talk about organizational wellness as well, why that's so important to do systems change so that folks can actually practice self-care in the workplace. It's not putting the care of others above your own. This is something, and Jen, we've talked about, comes up a lot, especially in our field. A lot of us in this field are survivors ourselves, right? And we've learned a pattern of, we want to come in and we want to give, of course, but oftentimes it's at the expense of ourselves, right? And so that is one notion we want folks to hopefully walk away from here, is to take a pause. That's actually not self-care when we're sacrificing so much that we're costing ourselves, our own mental health, our energy, our own health. And so that is not self-care. Radical self-care also is not, buying into consumerism and putting off self-care until you can purchase, right? It's like, oh, I hear often, I'm just making it till I can go on my vacation, or next year when I can cruise, or right. And actually, we're hoping to talk today about the smaller moments that it can be throughout your day, not when you can take that vacation or when whatever, right? And it's also not excusing that this is just part of the job because of the field that you work in. We hear that often, is that, this is the field of domestic violence, family violence. This is what's expected. This is what we do. We're in the work of trauma. And we're going to push back on that a little bit. This isn't just part of the job. In actuality, we should be centering this more because of the type of work that we do. And that's really important. So when we think and shift into like what radical self-care is, right? What it is, and we'll go through examples of these specifically, but what it is it really is bringing it into a daily practice, understanding your own stress response, understanding for yourself, what are signs that are coming up where you might be able to notice, oh, I need a pause, or I just need to take a break, or I need to walk outside. Allowing yourself to name what you are feeling. We are so disconnected for our bodies and our feelings and our own signals that our bodies will just override those. We'll just override the signals and carry on with our day. And it won't be until usually medical issues start to show up that we'll pause and wonder what's going on. Understanding that radical self-care is a practice. It is a practice. It's an approach to your life. It's the way you wake up every day, right? And we'll talk through and give some examples, but it is a practice. So just like with any type of practice, if you're, learning basketball, or you've decided to pick up tennis all of a sudden, right? You would be out there practicing your skill every day. This is similar. This is something that we're shifting towards, something that you actually, with intentionality, practice every single day in different ways. It is setting boundaries. That's a big one for our field. We have a hard time setting boundaries because of some of those notions around, this is just part of, this is just how we do things, or I need to keep on giving because I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to have received services myself, and now I want to give back. Yes. And sometimes we need some boundaries to allow us to be able to get the space that we need to take care of ourselves. It is understanding your own needs, and we'll go through some examples of those. practicing rest as resistance. And we'll talk more about that notion, but that's a beautiful notion that also has come out of the Black liberation movement, that is powerful and taking force. And tapping into the collective, like that, a collective piece that Angela Davis talked about, right? Is how do we start to shift? And that's where I think some people grapple with self-care, because it can feel very individualized, right? And we'll talk around how we can shift it and how actually it is very collective. So we'll talk about how to make it that way as well. So let's start with understanding your own stress response. So this is where sometimes we get to the point where our body is sending us big signals around our stress response. For us to get to this point, we've been stressed for a while. Our nervous system has been hit over and over on a daily basis over a long period of time. And we finally start to get tension headaches, maybe chronic pain. For a lot of us in our shoulders and neck, we'll get issues. We'll get gastrointestinal issues, which is one we hear about often in our field. It's very prevalent. It's very tied to a trauma response, right? And so we'll see this as a long-term effect on the body of individuals who've been through trauma or high stress. We see it amongst ourselves as well. Insomnia, right? Having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep or tossing and turning all night, not being able to really get good rest. And rest is so important. Just being a little bit irritable, annoyed throughout your day. And then sometimes even to the point where you have a hard time paying attention. If you see yourself here in this video, having a hard distracting with all kinds of things, right? Especially nowadays, we're so tech heavy, right? We're so tech heavy. And then what that does to our brains, though, it's like it's always on. So really needing time at the end of your evening to detox, allow yourself some time without it. I know it's so hard because those TikTok videos are so good, but really you'll notice that some of that, will show up in your difficulty paying attention. If you detox a little bit more, you'll notice that some of that might correct itself. But these are some just examples that, are a little bit more when it's been consistent for a while that you'll see these. And usually these are the ones that show up. And then we're like, maybe we should, go to the doctor. Or maybe I should go to a therapist, or maybe I should check in with someone, my acupuncturist, right? Or whoever I go to for wellness to see what's going on with me, because I am noticing some of these things, right? So this is a stress response. It's important for you to take note. If you notice any of these things showing up for yourself, let's pay attention. So next slide. Oh, Jen, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, so as we're, as Josie was talking about the stress response, we do have certain ways that we can respond to being exposed to trauma. And some of those kind of symptoms in our body that Josie was just talking about, she said can build up over time. But these are some other ways that trauma exposure might be affecting you. And some of them might be things you're more familiar with, things like maybe feeling hopeless or helpless, things like feeling fear or guilt, maybe guilt around like, am I doing enough, or did I help that person enough? Maybe being hypervigilant. So some of these are kind of similar to the symptoms that we see in post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe even dissociating a little bit, kind of going out of your mind, kind of not having a connection to your body, kind of going outside of yourself. And then other things here, and we do see chronic exhaustion and physical ailments show up in this chart too. But some other things that might not be kind of front and center in our minds when we think about how we might be impacted by trauma exposure, and might be, this is similar symptoms to burnout, that maybe we have an inflated sense of the importance of our work, that every single thing we're doing is the most important and we can't put it down, we can't stop. And of course our work is important, but we also, have to be able to pause and have a shift when we're out of work, to be able to have time for us to restore ourselves. and kind of connected that to that as a sense that you can never do enough, because there is always, the next hotline call to take, or, the next person to work with. It's easy to kind of get that sense that you can just never do enough. And it's, what you're contributing is never enough. But that, that just over time exacerbates our feelings of burnout, and kind of leads us to a point where perhaps we do leave our job, or leave the position, or leave the work completely, because that kind of feeling can burn us out real quick. And some other things I just wanted to point out were difficulties with kind of embracing and thinking about more complex situations. And having like less creativity, maybe less creative problem solving when you're working with somebody. When we're having a trauma response, even if it's a vicarious trauma response, some of our higher level functioning can kind of shut down, which we talk about sometimes, when survivors are being activated or triggered by something, that can kind of shut down those functions of planning and higher level thinking and decision making. And the same thing happens for all of us. So if you notice some of that happening, it could be a sense that, the trauma exposure is building up. And I did want to say that this is a chart from a book called Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. It's a book that's listed in our tip sheet as one of our resources. It's a great book to read if you want to understand these kind of responses in more detail and get some tools and ways to manage it if you notice it happening in yourself. But these are all things that happen as a transformation that takes place within us, as us being human beings responding to the suffering of other human beings. So it's coming from it's a normal thing that happens in response to abnormal things that are happening in our world that shouldn't be, but that we're there to show up for. So these are just some things to reflect on and think if you are seeing any in yourself.
Thank you, Jen. I really love this slide because it does, highlight the uniqueness of the work that we do in our field, and that, we do need to take special care and be aware of, I think oftentimes, especially if we have our own histories and we're here and we're just kind of in survival mode, doing and giving. But even, the disassociative moments that you mentioned here, that inflated sense of importance, I hear that a lot. And I know I have felt it too, where it's like, I have to be the one on call. It has to be me, because they have a connection with me, right? But not really realizing that that's actually a trauma exposure response, right? That's my own nervous system dysregulated, and feeling like I have to be on all the time for this particular person or this family or, the rescuer, right? And these are the unique aspects that are important for us to be aware of because of the work that we do. So thank you for sharing these very important piece elements too. So then on the next slide, so bringing it back to kind of our practice of self-care and a practice that we can bring into our lives to help us understand our own stress response. I really love what has come out in terms of us understanding our nervous system health, how we respond in times of stress, and this depiction of the window of tolerance. And you'll see at the bottom who the link, and we'll include it in our tip sheet, an article where you can go more in depth into this. But this is an image to basically capture, right, how our stress response happens. So the window of tolerance, if you think of the window as a river, and you're floating down it, right? That's life, right? We have, we float down the stream of life, right? And some days are a little bit more stressful than others, right? And so when the river narrows, right, and the water starts to think about, floating down New Braunfels, the river narrows, it starts to get more bumpy, you start to pick up speed, right? And it's a little bit scary. So your nervous system might get a little bit more alert, right? Be careful, we're going down this rough patch, right? That's how life is. We go through this every day. And then when it widens, it becomes more calm, slow down. You might be able to actually chill on that float and look around, right? And take in the surroundings. You're not so nervous anymore. Things are a little bit cool, calm, and collected, a little bit more balanced. You feel in control, you feel relaxed, right? You feel like, okay, I'm ready for the next narrowing, right? The next waterfall that comes my way, because I'm chill right now. I'm ready for it to come, and I can handle it. That's your window of tolerance, right? Ideally, we're in a space, and we're going to narrow and we're going to widen, right? Throughout our day. From the morning to the afternoon, we can be driving into the office, and all of a sudden someone, pulls out in front of us and we go on alert, right? That's that narrowing of the water. All of a sudden it's bumpy, our nervous system's a little bit nervous. And then, everything's cool, calm. We keep on going with our day. And ideally we would come down to a cool, calm state. We have some control, and we can help our nervous systems learn how to be in a calm state for longer periods of time. Or we can also teach our nervous systems how to recover when we have those stressful situations, like that car pulling out in front of you, right? That's what we consider the window of tolerance, what we're hoping to do in these practices. And again, today's just an introduction. We'll have another video on some skills on what to practice with window of tolerance in another video. But this is just an introduction, right? For you to be able to start to understand how our nervous system responds. So we can widen our window of tolerance by our practice of meditation, of deep breaths, of practicing observance, of practicing mindfulness, right? Any kind for yourself, think of any time where you're kind of cool, calm, and collected. What are some practices you can do to get to that space? That helps your nervous system learn that you're safe, that it's okay to be calm, right? On the other end of that, though, when we go through stress often and we're chronically stressed, our window of tolerance shrinks. And so we might have a moment where we're cool, calm, and collected, but those moments are very small, very, very short, very far and few between. And so we might have those moments where like, oh, okay, I can take a breath. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're dysregulated. You're out of your window of tolerance. So we can actually expand our window of tolerance through practice. One of the other things we can do is start to understand what our dysregulation looks like in our nervous systems. And so they give the example of the volcano. That's like someone who gets dysregulated and at the hyperarousal mode, we're like feeling super anxious, angry. You can feel it in your body, right? A lot of tension in your body. Your muscles feel like they want to actually fight or run away, and you can feel that pumping through your muscles. That's the hyper kind of going up to the hyperarousal mode. We use the metaphor of the volcano going up, or the iceberg going down, right? Getting cold. So hypoarousal is that opposite, right? So I'm talking at the bottom. That's where we have decreased responsiveness, like you talked about, Jen, disassociation, where we're just kind of numb. We're just floating through our day. We're exhausted. We might feel depressed, but you can't pinpoint why, right? You're tired. You might start falling asleep throughout your day. That's the opposite response. They're both responses to extreme stress. They're just different. They just show up differently in our nervous systems. So what we can start to do, where our practice is starting to notice where you see where it says dysregulation on either side of the window of tolerance, one up in orange and one down in green. We can start to notice when our nervous system starts to get hyper aroused, right? But before it gets to the extreme response, this is where the practice is. This is where the everyday practice is, moment to moment, where you're checking in with your nervous system. What am I noticing? Am I noticing that my breath is starting to get more rapid? Am I starting to feel a little bit agitated? Or just for yourself, right? Your voice might change. Like my kids can tell when I'm a little short, they'll say like your voice changed. Right. So they're good cues to help me understand my nervous system. Right. So it's before you're out of control, right? It's before that moment where like, I need to run or I need to fight. It's before that. Our body's sending us a lot of signals. The same thing with the hypoarousal. It's before we're in complete shutdown. It's where we start to feel a little overwhelmed, and you start to maybe lose track of time. You're not completely out of control, but you're starting to notice. And so if you go to the next slide, we have some examples of here, and we like to have you take a couple minutes to notice, right? Think about the last couple of days. And what have you noticed in terms of what has showed up for you in either one of these areas? Hyperarousal, remember that's the volcano, that's the up. Hypoarousal is the down, the iceberg, the freeze response. What if some of these kind of have showed up for you just in the last couple of days? And what you might notice as you look through this list is that you actually checked things in both columns. Because what will happen usually is we'll go through both of these in one day from moment to moment, right? So we might be super anxious and have been in hyperarousal for a period of time, and our body actually will put us into shutdown. So how many of you have had, like, a deadline for work, or we're studying for a license or something you were doing, and then you work, study, and then you got it, you finished it, and then you have that sick. A lot of people will get sick after that. I remember I would get sick after every finals exam. I would crash, right? That's that shutdown. Your body actually comes in and takes over, because it's not good for us to be in hyperarousal for so long. So it'll take over and we'll go into shutdown. We might get sick. We might need to sleep a lot, right? And so we go through both of these, right? These throughout our day. So you might have noticed you checked marked on both those sides. So the key here is that we just start to notice, that we start to check in, and we start to notice, I'm starting to feel my thoughts are picking up, or I'm starting to get really tired. I feel like I'm just kind of floating around. I'm really not in my body, right? And then when in the other video we'll have is when you start to notice those things, what can you do? So that's what we'll cover in those videos. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just an example of what you can do when you start to notice and really understand and respond to your need. Taking a deep breath is always so helpful and so powerful. Actually checking in with your body, noticing if you have any tension in areas of your body, or maybe you are sweating, or maybe your heart is racing. Take another deep breath and name what that body sensation is for yourself. So this is where we start, right, to practice the noticing. We are so out of our body in our day-to-day life. We are so up here often in our frontal lobe for the majority, I would say, of our workday, for sure, right? And so being able to understand, okay, what is actually happening in my body? Are your limbs cold? Or do you feel tension? Is your heart racing? Are you tired? Right? Allowing yourself to check in and understand what is happening in my body. What are the physical sensations? Physical sensations are usually easier to identify. And then if you want to take it to the next level, you can go to the next slide. This is where we have, I love this feelings wheel. If you haven't seen this before, we had the link in our tip sheet. But this is where we can start to understand what's actually going on in my feelings realm, right? What is happening for me? Am I kind of, is my heart racing because I'm frustrated? Right? Did something happen in a meeting what got me worked up, right? Am I feeling frustration, or another feeling, maybe in that anger area, or even in the fearful area, right? Do I feel insecure or inferior or inadequate, right? What are the feelings that are coming along with these body sensations? Oftentimes they go hand in hand. What is coming up for me? What is the feeling that's coming in afterwards? So so you can start to identify, again, it's a practice, start to observe for yourself, and so you can understand your processes better. If you go to the next slide, The next step then is once you start to, you understand yourself a little bit more, right? You understand your stress response, you understand what's coming up for you. Now, it sounds very easy. This is a process. This takes years, right? So many of us go into therapy are still working years into it on, okay, what is coming up for me? So I don't want to oversimplify this. This is not an easy process, but just to introduce this journey, right? If you're interested and you're like, oh, okay, let me find more resources and how I can do this for myself, right? This is where a therapist can come very in handy. So recognizing your needs. After you understand what your needs are, moving into recognizing, pinpointing what you need in relation to your body, that body sensation that came up, or that feeling. So what does it mean? Right? So I have that physical sensation of tension in my legs and my arms. Do I need some physical movement? I know for myself, I have to do this often. I get anxious. I'm a very anxious person. And so when I get dysregulated, I'll have to like just go for a walk and like actually work it out of my muscles. I'm able-bodied and able to do that sometimes, depending on what's going on with my chronic health. But movement, even if I've learned other movements that can help me get that tension out of my physical body, right? So now that I know, what my stress response is, I can respond to myself throughout the day. So that might mean I step outside, right? I might just stand up from my desk and do a few stretches, again, as a way to take care of myself throughout my day. Of course, it would be lovely to wait for a massage and be able to get a massage every day, but that's not that's not realistic, right? So what can I do in the interim? How can I take care of my body in the way that the stress shows up in my physical body, right? So touch is another one. Maybe you're having some feelings of overwhelm at your work, right? Is there a way that you can connect with your colleagues, with your community, to build trust, to be seen, right? Connection is another one that can be very healing for our nervous systems. And, sometimes we just need a laugh, right? And just having those days that we're in that stress response and, okay, I'm stressed. I need a minute. I'm going to open up my TikTok and just find some silly dog or cat videos that just make me laugh, right? I'm going to maybe pop into my colleague's office, or maybe I'll reach out to see who has a quick moment for, just to connect and share some joy. Look at, family videos, or if that's a source of joy for you, right? Or chosen family, right? Like just things that can take you out of the moment and respond and help. Again, remember that window of tolerance. We're helping our nervous system regulate. We're going back to our window of tolerance, reminding our nervous system we're okay and we can calm down. So those are the steps in terms of really thinking through of how you can take care of yourself throughout your day. This is very radical, right? Our practice is to ignore all of this and just keep on moving along until we get to the point, right, where we're really not feeling well in our physical body, or we're burnt out, right, in our jobs, and really struggling just to come to work every day. And so these are things that we can, again, this is a journey. This is a very oversimplified way of thinking of this, but it's a starting point. Jen, do you want to add anything before I move on?
No, I really am glad we're emphasizing this, and that, some ways to think about kind of coming back to your window of tolerance. And, as you've been mentioning, I do think it does take work. And I think sometimes we think of self-care as kind of this thing, that's purely there to make us feel good. And some of this can be uncomfortable to work through. Like some of this can feel hard, like especially if we're not in practice of doing this. I know when I started, it was like, it just felt really hard and uncomfortable. And I think, working with somebody, talking it through with somebody, or talking it through with a therapist can really be helpful to, to work through some of that. But just wanted to raise up that it can be uncomfortable too, but as we practice it more, it becomes more comfortable, becomes more of a thing that really does help us, and we can see the difference over time. So, but yeah, I think it's great that we're, even for anybody who's watching this right now, who's taking the time to just think about this and reflect on it, I think is a move towards radical self-care.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to highlight that core point of it feeling uncomfortable, because remember what we said earlier and what Angela Davis said, right? This is intergenerational for so many of us, right? It was handed down to us to work, right? And it can be hard when you start to disrupt this pattern. Your nervous system is like, what are you doing? Why are we slowing down, first of all? And especially, for trauma survivors, right? Our nervous systems might be used to being in survival mode. So then when we start to try something different, it can be very scary. And so, speaking to a therapist or a wellness provider, right? If you have a massage therapist or Reiki provider, acupuncturist, right? Folks that do this type of body work, it would be helpful to talk to and get support from when those moments of like, I'm trying to take care of myself, but it's my body's like, what's happening? Because I'm not used to it, of doing it in this way. And so finding strategies that work for you. So they might look very different depending on where your nervous system's at and what you need in that moment. So in the next slide, just a summary, right, of helps you walk through of understanding your own needs. Remember to take a deep breath, check in with your body. And again, all of these things can be adapted depending on where you're at and how your body's responding. So checking in with your body, you can do with your eyes open. You don't have to close your eyes, right? You can do an external like a scan versus feeling, in your body too much just when you get started. So someone can help you think through how do you adapt these strategies for yourself, because they can be uncomfortable and you don't want to overwhelm yourself in this work either. You want to listen, be compassionate, and take it easy. Name that body sensation, right? Like we said, name that feeling, name the need associated with the feeling and the body sensation. We walk through that, right? And then communicate that need to yourself. So oftentimes we skip this step, right? It's like actually reminding, and that's where the self-reflection, the journaling that we practiced earlier can come into handy, like communicate, just like journal to yourself, communicate this process to yourself and what you actually need, right? And then if you have safety with those around you, with your colleagues, communicate that need to others. Sharing, right, externally now, hey, I'm going to try something new, right? I'm going to be trying to take care of myself in a different way. And that might look different, right? And so being able to start to communicate that with those that you trust can be very powerful and helpful in your journey as well. So this is the understanding your needs kind of flow. You can always come back to this. Now, one of the things we mentioned earlier was around setting boundaries. So if you go to the next slide, this was one thing that we mentioned, that this is another difficult practice to start for sure. When you start this journey around setting boundaries, right? And boundaries can really trigger for individuals discomfort. These boundaries are very connected to our own histories, our own childhoods, our own development, our own attachment, right? And so I don't present this lightly. This is not a light topic or an easy topic, and boundaries can be extremely helpful. And I see them more like as a practice. Again, just like self-care, you practice starting to figure out ways to set boundaries that are comfortable for you. Boundaries are really communicating to those that you're in relationship with what you need in those relationships, right? And so identifying what is in your control and what is not, what might need to change, right? Like really being honest with yourself. Again, it's hard to, identify what might need to change because you have to identify what's in your control, right? But sometimes you can still figure out, okay, maybe I can shift, for example, my work schedule, right? Because I really need to be able to go to my doctor's appointment in the mornings or whatever that is, right? So identifying that for yourself and then communicating that, like we said earlier, to yourself first, identifying it for yourself, what you need, and then to other. In this case, it would be, right, your boss or your colleagues or your team to say, hey, is there a way that we can shift, right? Where you step in at this time, I step in at that time, whatever, so that I can have the time that I need to go make my appointments or, whatever that is for you. And then, a big one for us is saying no, especially, right? Those of us who, from different marginalized identities, saying no, we've been given different messages on whether or not it's okay for us to say no. And so being able to start to this journey for yourself, if this really is bringing up a guttural response of like, oh, I don't know about this topic. This is something to definitely explore more for yourself. And it again, this is an oversimplification. There's an entire book. I don't know if I have it here, but there's a book around setting boundaries. It's a newer book. That's a really great resource. And we'll make sure that that's in the tip sheet as well around this topic.
Yeah, I think it's setting boundaries, no peace. But yeah, I read that one and I was like, oh, wow, this is I need this book. But I think I wanted just to add a piece on to everything you were saying, Josie, is like one thing that's helped me is like thinking through potential responses when I set a boundary, when I'm like thinking about setting a boundary or communicating one of my needs, to think about like, okay, what are the possible outcomes here of what somebody might say, and kind of preparing myself mentally and emotionally, like if somebody totally rejects my boundary, or if if someone just really doesn't respond well to it, what do I want my response to be, as much as we can anticipate that, because there's a lot of different things that are out of our control, that we don't know how someone will react completely. But preparing myself for that has helped a little bit, to kind of be like, okay, I know here's a bit of a plan of how what I could do if I get certain reactions. So
yes, I love that. That can be super, and it also allows you to stay grounded and and set in what it is that you need, right? It's regardless of how another person responds, right? Can you come back, and maybe it's communicating it differently, or just standing your ground, right? And that's very difficult. So practice, all of this practice helps for sure. And it's a journey, definitely. So we want to go back to the concept of rest as resistance. Like I noted, this is really a new movement coming out of Black Liberation Movement. There's a Tricia Hersey is founder of the NAP Ministry. You can find them on Instagram. They started the NAP Ministry, I think, just by a post on Instagram, and then resonated so much that now there's a book. It's called Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto. And this is where this quote is. So we're just bringing us back to, right, the systemic reasons for why we're doing this, right? Your body is a site of liberation. It doesn't belong to capitalism. We've learned and internalized this. Love your body, rest your body, move your body, hold your body. It's a powerful thing that we're doing. This is why it's so hard. And you might, initially be like, nope, no, thank you. I don't want to go down this journey, right? And reminding yourself that this is a very radical stake that you're taking, and claim that you're taking by resting, taking care of your body, and communicating those boundaries, and communicating this with other people around you, including your colleagues. So next slide, self-awareness and intentionality is key when we're doing this work. And so thinking of ways that you're checking in with yourself, like we mentioned before, journaling, having moments of just quiet, which I know is hard, especially if you have multiple roles and you're a parent and you're juggling all the things. But again, it can be just in your car, right? Before you step out of your car, you've just driven up to the office, and you just give yourself 3 more minutes to pause there and take a deep breath and check in with yourself, right? Before you go in, or before you join that meeting, that Zoom call, right? take a deep breath, right? Or if you're in the restroom, take maybe a longer route to the restroom just so you can walk a little bit more, right? Just those small little moments, but taking time to build self-awareness and be really intentional about this practice is, I think, really important in trying to take this on. So we want to take a pause and just do a quick radical self-care check-in. This self-care wheel is nice because it, like Angela Davis said, around holistic, right? Wellness, thinking of the different aspects of ourself and how we're doing. And this chart comes from a larger workbook that I really like, and has journal prompts and journal questions that walks you through all these different areas. What I like about this, you can kind of see, like, which area do I feel like checking in on today? Maybe I'm going to check in on my physical health, right? How am I doing in that area? Am I sleeping? Am I taking time off, right? Am I taking care of my physical body? Am I taking walks and movement? Movement is a big one that we're often lacking when we're overworking and overfunctioning. And so you can just pick one of these right now. Just take a minute and check in for yourself. And then maybe in that area that you picked to check in on, there's one thing that stands out that you're like, hey, maybe I'm going to follow up on that, right? So maybe if you pick the psychological sphere, you can say, hey, I'm going to buy myself a new journal, right? A new journal, some nice pens, and I'm going to carry it with me. So when I have moments, I'm going to self-reflect. Or maybe I haven't taken a walk today, so I'm going to take a walk. So think of whatever that sphere was, one thing that you can do for yourself today. Okay. So along with this, in the next couple of slides, we're just giving some tips around radical self-care. So just things to remind yourself of. Again, these are things that are very basic, right? And we ignore them very often, maybe because they are so basic. And so just reminding yourself, right? Are you drinking your water? How are you treating your body? And treating your body with care. We have so many complicated relationships with our bodies, but how have I treated my body with care today? Does that mean if I'm feeling pain, actually allowing myself to slow down versus pushing through, right? Or taking care of that pain versus ignoring it? Eating food, nourishing foods, cultural foods that are great for our bodies, right? That just give us to take care of, is a beautiful way that we can communicate to our body that we're taking care of it by actually eating our meals. How many of us skip meals because we have to jump into a meeting, or we're eating while we're talking on calls? I've done that plenty of times, right? And so there are, I remember a beautiful example of an Indigenous practitioner sharing of, like, he went to a meal with some elders and no one spoke. No one talked at all during the meal. And it was because they were mindfully eating, right? And connecting with the nourishment of our food, and so many of our cultural practices around our food. And so allowing ourselves to reconnect with those. And like we said earlier, checking in with your feelings, your thoughts, your needs, your impulses, what's coming up for you on a daily basis. Some other ones on the next slide are around limiting our screen consumption, media, news. I know more recently, a lot of folks have used these strategies to help buffer what might be happening in the news feeds. There's a lot of toxicity, right, in the air. And so being able just to unplug, I often hear, well, I do this type of work and I have to know what's going on. And yes, and is there a way that you can know what's going on in sound bites versus having the news, for example, that's very stressful, playing in the background for hours? And so is there a way that you can consume it that lets you get the highlights without being overwhelmed and your nervous system, because it is very overwhelming right now. Speak to yourself kindly, move your body the way you're able, that feels good to you. And creativity, like you mentioned earlier, Jen, oftentimes we get disconnected from creativity when we're in our stress response. That's one of the first things that you can check in about. Like, when was the last time I was creative? Even, when was the last time I colored? When was the last time I painted? When was the last time, I built something or created something? This one is a really easy one to spot, because oftentimes that goes first. And then just stepping outside and getting some sunlight. I know it's hot. We're going into summer for Texas right now, but allowing yourself, even if it's just a few seconds, to step outside and take it in, right? Look up to the air, or put your feet on the ground and ground yourself, and feel yourself rooted. Any comments you want to add there, Jen, before we're starting to move towards wrapping up?
Yeah, just wanted to acknowledge how helpful these practices can be to boost your health, your wellness, and to kind of stave off burnout, or help yourself recover from burnout. But we also want to be real and acknowledge that sometimes we're using certain behaviors to cope and try to help ourselves feel better that can potentially become unhelpful or unhealthy. I'm thinking about things like drinking alcohol or going shopping, which are totally fine and can be really helpful at times. And you might want to have a glass of wine at the end of the day, or go out shopping with a friend, which can be really helpful to our wellness. But these are also things that, if we're relying on those behaviors to escape or to kind of numb out some of the more difficult feelings or uncomfortable feelings we might be having, or anxious thoughts, or anything that's hard for us, if we're kind of using those things to cope with that, or to numb those things out, then it might be something for us to keep checking in with ourselves about. If you kind of notice that some of the things that are in your self-care practice, your radical self-care practice, that might, if they start to interfere with how your job, or with your relationships or your life in ways that don't feel so great, or that are causing some issues, it might be a moment to pause and just think, like, is this something that's boosting my wellness, or has it become something that is impeding my wellness and becoming unhealthy for me? So just adding that in as a point of reflection. I think we've all probably had things that feel good, or that we've done to try to help ourselves cope, that maybe went down a path that ended up not being so helpful. So just wanted to acknowledge that piece as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think, the importance is always thinking of balance. How can we balance? I mean, even moving your body, we can start over exercising, right? In the nutrition, we can go on restrictive diets, right? Like, our society just works in extremes, right? And it's hard to find the balanced approach to any of this, right? And so really, thank you for that reminder. That's really important, just to have in your own mind a conceptualization of, like, what does it look like to approach these things from a balanced space for yourself.
Yeah. And having
So
compassion too, for
oh
ourselves
yeah,
about it, like that,
sure.
we're doing the best we can with hard things and hard situations. So bringing that compassion to ourselves.
Yes, and we're changing some big patterns, right? And system patterns that are very difficult. Yes, that self-compassion is key. So the next couple of slides, we want to specifically, because of our field, right? We want to specifically talk about burnout. What are some strategies that could be helpful? Again, these are practices, right? Small daily practices. But even checking in with yourself, starting your day with a well-being practice, right? Of just journaling, right? Or taking a few deep breaths, you can find so many meditations on Spotify or YouTube, like just picking a 5-minute one, or a walking meditation. So really intentionally seeing how you can start your day to ground yourself, to connect with your body, maybe change up your routine, the way, like I said earlier, maybe if you're like, hey, I need to add a, a physical therapy appointment, or actually acupuncture appointment, or an exercise appointment, right? Whatever that looks like, a wellness appointment. Like, can you talk to your colleagues on how you can make that happen? Finding a creative outlet, right? Like we mentioned earlier, creativity goes pretty quickly when we're stressed and we don't have the time. And so it could be something as simple as like painting by numbers, right? If you like to express art that way, or allowing yourself to go to a spoken word, right? Performance, if you like to art or express art in that way, whatever your creative outlet is. And if you haven't connected with that for a while, maybe you try a few different things, right? Till you can reconnect for yourself, but really intentionally spending time connecting with something that is a creative outlet for yourself. Focusing on impact, right? On how the impact on how these things are doing for you to shift your nervous system, softening your workspace and your workflow. I know we did a lot of shifts when the pandemic happened, and many of us went 100% virtual or majority virtual, hybrid models now, as most of us are on. But think of softening your workspace and your workflow, thinking of how you have your computer set up. What art do you have, or do you have a window in your space, right? Those kind of things. Really, the physical space has have a significant impact on how our brain is processing information. And again, soothing. Lots of plants are very soothing as well, if you're a plant person, and can keep them alive. Try to get some plants around you. And then the next slide, other things that you can do is practice identifying your triggers. What are your triggers throughout the day? What do you notice? Like, I'm really stressed this part of the day. Do you notice that there's particular triggers? Is it particular meetings or particular things happening in your environment that are triggering you, and trying to adjust as much as you can around those things? Scheduling time for rest. So when you take a lunch break, actually take your lunch break and breathe and just eat your food and take that time for yourself, rather than maybe jumping into a colleague's office and talking or whatever, right? That might look like. Adjust your pace. Adjust your pace is a big one. We're used to high performing, and I think the pandemic, this was one of the biggest things, is that a lot of folks realize, whoa, what am I doing? Right? I produce, I work a lot. And then the pandemic really shifted that for us, for many of us. Like, what does this mean now to work at a different pace? And seeing if you can continue to work at adjusting that for yourself. Talk about it with someone. Again, this can be a therapist, this can be a colleague, a trusted friend, someone in your network, another wellness professional. But it can be helpful just to talk through, a mentor, what you're experiencing in terms of burnout, and especially with your colleagues and your boss. And sometimes exercise can help, again, with balance. And this can be exercise that is according to what your body can do, right? Not ignoring your body, but responding to your body. So if that is a walk during the day, or some light stretches, whatever that looks like for you, thinking of how to incorporate these in your daily routine, again, to help you shift when you're really feeling at that point of burnout. Was the reason why we had these slides specifically when we're thinking of burnout. And so we had mentioned a couple of times, right? Radical self-care is really collective. So we've given you a lot of strategies for checking in with self, right? For checking in with your own routines, checking in with all your different needs, right? But we don't want to miss, right? That connection is a biological need. One of the things that we are coming off of from the pandemic was that was disrupted, right? We had isolation, we had to shut down and actually physically distance from those around us. And many of us might still be in that sense, right? Your nervous system, I still hear of people feeling really overwhelmed and connecting with other people and being physical spaces with other people. And so we're slowly needing to retrain our nervous system around being connected. And virtually, we have this tool, thankfully, now that we can still be connected, but with physical distance. But some of us got really comfortable being isolated. And isolation can lead to, right, burnout and depression, anxiety, right? And so we want to shift to the collective here and intentionally connect with those others that care for you, connect with people that are safe and supportive, right? Those individuals, either their bio family or maybe not, maybe they're your own chosen family that you've built, your community that you've built. When we connect, we engage, right, that this part of our nervous system that helps us regulate. There's things such as co-regulation, and being in connection, even virtually, with someone else can help us co-regulate our nervous systems. The opposite of that, when we're in a workforce where we're all tired and burnt out and we're doing trauma work, we can actually be impacted the other way too, right? Where we're stressed and anxious. And so it's really important to think of intentionally this bubbles that you have that can help you calm and regulate your nervous system. You know those people, right? You can probably have a few of them in your mind, right? The folks that, oh, they really nourish you, right? This is the connection that we're thinking of. So prioritizing connection with those individuals who respect your boundaries, who offer you support, where it is a mutual relationship, where you feel recharged. So much of our work is giving energy exchange, right, with other individuals, other people that need our support, that it is important for us to find the people who actually refuel us and offer us support. Right. So that is, and that is a radical piece of actually bringing in the collective of to our healing and to our self-care practice as well. So I'm going to pause there. Jen, any last minute thoughts as we wrap up? This is our last slide.
No, just glad that this collective piece is something worth thinking about. And I loved what you talked about with the co-regulation, that we can help to kind of bring each other down, to a calmer place, or to a place where we can become regulated. And that it does work the other way too, sometimes, where we can impact each other and, through our stressful experiences and anxieties and things like that. Not to put any blame on anyone, but just to kind of notice that does happen. Yeah, I appreciate you raising that.
So the last slide is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'll have, other videos in our series around one that has the practices. So I'll go back to the regulation, dysregulation, window of tolerance model, and talk through different practices that you can use if you're feeling hyper aroused or hypo aroused. There's different ways that you respond in those states that can help, again, regulate your nervous system, bringing you back to that state of calm, collected, and connected, right? Is another piece for us to pay attention to. But feel free to reach out to us in between. Here's our email addresses, and we're happy to connect. Thank you all.
Thanks everyone for being here with us. You can join us for our next video that focuses on organizational wellness, organizational trauma and wellness. And as Josie mentioned, the other practice videos to help regulate our nervous systems. But thank you so much for being with us. Reach out if you want to talk more.